Welcome back, everybody, to our live stream, streaming out live right now at the ukcolumn.org and also at Rumble. Thank you very much for rejoining us. Now, this is the final session for our virtual symposium, Propaganda 9/11 and the Global War on Terror. And we're very pleased that we've been able to gather some of our presenters for this final roundtable discussion to sort of maybe elaborate on some of the points that we weren't able to earlier and maybe sort of discover some new things that we can go forward with right now. And I'm pleased to be joined. We have Dr. Piers Robinson. We have Professor Jeremy Keenan. We've also got Matthew Campbell. We have David Hughes. And we have Richard Elifritz. And we have Lucy Morgan Edwards joining us right now. Hello, everyone. And I'd like to go first to Dr. Piers Robinson. And I know you led off this event, and I hope that what we've heard so far today, Piers, was definitely what everyone was expecting. I believe that it was, and but I think it's really important to stress, as you did earlier on, the role of those in academia. We accept that there are issues within the academy, not able to, let's say, hesitant to use a more present day colloquial term, to cover some of these issues, but to then put emphasis and encourage people to engage with the work which has been done. And that's the really important message. But I wanted to have you start off this discussion, Dr. Piers Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, as I said when I introduced at the start of this webinar, the working group formed because a lot of us were very aware of the limitations of scholarship looking into the war on terror, propaganda and deception, as well as principally the starting event itself, 9/11. And you know, this is a perennial problem in academia and in main academia. I think it's getting a lot worse now as we're moving through the COVID event. I mean, we had, of course, Bristol University firing Professor David Miller a week ago after a concerted campaign by the Israel lobby to have him removed from his position. The kind of pressures on academia are very extreme now, and then the level of self-censorship and I think, you know, this is the key thing. We're now 20 years into the global war on terror, and just, you know, sort of observing some of the presentations we've had, especially the latter ones, you know, you start to get a real sense of the scale of this conflict and the level of suffering that has occurred, including, you know, Jeremy's talk in the Sahel regions, stuff which just is completely off the radar screen. It's not even in the independent alternative media. And it's really quite, it's testament to the scale of propaganda that there's been. And, you know, again, in relation to the working group, I mean, we have people who are doing excellent work. I hope really making a contribution and will continue to make a contribution to the historical record on all of these conflicts, the historical record from 9/11 right through to Syria and whatever is next to come in terms of the global war on terror. And it is testament to the state of academia that a group of us have to form this kind of working group in order to try to facilitate this research, and then of course sort of, you know, ask for funding and so on, and donations to see whether we can get support to sort of strengthen what we're doing. But I think that's the reality of where we are at the moment. I mean, we had the 9/11 event, and we had some excellent talks early on, which hopefully we've highlighted to those amongst viewers who aren't aware of the controversies, that there's the official story is not correct, is not true. We have propaganda there, as well as with the whole war on terror, and as well as with specific conflicts such as Syria and Iraq and so on. But we have a level of sort of profound lack of knowledge in the academy about this conflict, the scale of it. And yeah, it's testament to where we are. And I just, I hope that we sort of start to move, although we have to get through the COVID-19 phase, as I was saying at the end of my presentation, and Dan was saying as well, that we can move to a point where we, perhaps as a working group, can start to just prod and encourage mainstream academia to actually start to do its job better. than it has been. And if they're not going to do the work, then we'll do the work ourselves in the fullness of time. But I think, the sense I get from from all the talks I've been listening to and the work that various people are involved in is that this is absolutely essential work in order to just get the historical record straight for future generations, and to actually sort of also to help us to understand where we are at the moment with COVID-19 and where we're going with the very high levels of propaganda and the very profound threats to our democracies internally. I think, as so many critical commentators have pointed out, and I think you, Pat, have pointed out, that the global war on terror has somewhat segued into a new form. We have a sort of hybrid warfare against domestic populations in the West, almost in many ways. So these are all essential areas of inquiry, and I hope that our presence and what various people of our working group are doing will just help to perhaps prod or even shame more mainstream academics to start paying attention, starting with, and we started with Matt, starting with 9/11 itself and the gaping holes in the official story, and the question of justice for the people, for example, with Matt and in relation to his brother.
Yeah, we'll on that we'll go to Matt Campbell, and Matt, you sort of led off the discussions today with your case, and the reason we're very keen to bring you into this event is also to remind people that there are ongoing issues, unresolved issues. There's legal challenges in the United States, plus your case here in the UK. There's a number of things to do with the compensation of first responders, 9/11 families, and so forth, first responders' families as well, victims' families. And so now we're 20 years on, and I know you probably didn't envision that you would still be fighting this fight in the year 2021, but it seems to me like you are getting very close to, I think, some very interesting things happened. And that's going to happen for your case. Just give us your thoughts on what your feeling is. Has the public mood or the appetite, or maybe are we more free to talk about this now? Is there any opportunities that have opened up just by the sheer amount of time that's passed by?
Yeah, I mean, I take encouragement from the fact that it took the Bloody Sunday families 20 years to get together, let alone to start their process, to get some sort of truth and justice about their loved ones. And in a similar way, although it's obviously different, the Hillsborough families. The passage of time, it doesn't stop. If you've got that burning desire in you as a family member to get some justice, it's never going to disappear. It's never going to go away. Particularly when you're blatantly being lied to about certain aspects of whatever the official narrative is saying. So, I mean, for me, I'm kind of staggered that, I'm still doing this 20 years. But at the same time, very pleased with a couple of things. Number one, obviously the submission to the Attorney General was a big thing for me and my family. My dad's part of the Motley Rice Saudi lawsuit. Without saying anything good or bad about Biden, I'm kind of surprised that he signed that executive order on the 3rd of September, ordering the FBI to hand over the Saudi files, whatever they're going to give up. It's frustrating that it's, apart from one case, nothing's been taken to a court of law about 9/11, and everything that's led to me is quite astonishing. And so in whatever small way my action can kickstart something, and I'd say, I mean, a lot of people talk about where are the family members, and I know from personal experience, it's both within my own family and other victim family members that I've met, it's not easy. I mean, you're raking everything back up when you start talking about this, and when you take certain action, it really isn't easy. And so although I've got these families in the US and the UK that have written letters of support, And, and I thank them for that. I also know there's lots of family members, both in the UK. There's 3 other victim family members in the UK who think like I do, but don't want to go public. And, I've got to respect them for where they're at still in their grieving process. And it is hard. It's not easy. But I just hope that something happens on this legal front, because it's got to the point where there's so much out there, so much research, so much stuff that's even on official record, that it's just not being pulled together, and nothing's changing in terms of how people perceive the events of 9/11, but also, potentially people being held accountable for it. And so I'm just hopeful that, in a small way, that what we're trying to do can kickstart that, and hopefully, giving encouragement to other family members to actually take a stand and go public.
Definitely, and we'll be keeping a keen eye on what you're doing and seeing how your case develops, and we wish you all the best as well. But we want to also go over now to Dr. David Hughes. And David, the issues that some of the other speakers have brought up, and certainly that you brought up as well with the problems within the academy. You've attended some of the country's top universities as a student. You've taught at top institutions in America, or in the UK. You've attended in America as well. Uh, to what degree does this problem extend not only from the faculty, but how about the students as well? Because some of us can speak to that who've been students in the university system recently, myself included, where there's a profound lack of enthusiasm in terms of asking questions, challenging state authority, institutions, and so forth. It's there's certain things that are safe to do now on university campuses in terms of identity politics, or to be protesting, anti-racism and so forth. But there's other things that are absolutely verboten. For instance, like what you were talking about regarding 9/11, but also with regards to COVID-19 as well, or vaccines. This is probably the case right now. So I wanted to get your comment on this, what you're observing in terms of overall, how much of an overall cultural change is going on that is stifling discourse on campus.
Well, I think in large part this loops back to what Piers was saying at the start about the need to understand the sheer scale on which the propaganda and the perception management have been working for such a long period of time. Now, as I've highlighted in my presentation, I think academics are perhaps even more susceptible than other members of the population to this for all kinds of various reasons. But of course, it does extend also to the students and to their families and to the whole of society. So we're placed in a situation today where I think things are getting very tense and very difficult under COVID, because essentially what you have is almost kind of parallel consciousnesses operating throughout society. So you have those people who have been able to take a critical distance from what's going on, assess the facts and evidence for themselves, acquaint themselves with the history of some of the things that we've been talking about, and who are able to understand that there's something very sinister and very suspect about what is taking place in the world right now. You only have to look to Australia, for example, to see how quickly liberal democracy is collapsing, and new authoritarian forms of rule are installing themselves. On the other side, you have what are sometimes referred to as the normies, and these are ordinary, decent, good people who are trying to get through life, and they're trusting, they believe in authority, they believe what the government tells them, they believe that the government is looking out for their best interests. They innocently will maybe put the 6 o'clock news on while they have their dinner and so on. And they don't realize that they're constantly imbibing all of these very carefully crafted messages and narratives and forms of perception management, which are actually shaping their worldview without them even realizing it. Many academics, for example, it's almost a stereotype in the UK, but many academics like to listen to Radio 4 and read The Guardian. And in doing so, they seem to think that they are, I don't know, somehow better educated or above the kind of person that might, for example, read the Daily Mail or the Daily Mirror. But what they don't realize is that they're still having their thought processes shaped in very subtle ways, which leads them to quite entrenched positions. And what you find because of the cognitive dissonance is that very often academics are, it's not only that they're not willing to entertain some of the ideas that we've been talking about, but they can actually get very angry very quickly if you even dare to suggest some of these things. And at this point, evidence and reason really goes out of the window, and you're left with this highly kind of emotional response, which I would say bears the hallmarks of a kind of traumatic, kind of mind-controlled reaction, which has been largely conditioned by the media. So to come back to your question, I think it is very difficult, and certainly I've been very careful in the wake of what's happened to Professor Mark Crispin-Miller at NYU, where he's now actually suing many of his own colleagues in his own department for criticizing him over asking students to ask basic questions about the science of mask wearing. Personally, I'm being very, very, very careful about what I say. Now, it shouldn't be like that. You should be able, as an academic, to point reasonably to evidence and to ask students to assess it and to think critically about it. But we're in a very emotive situation now, a very highly charged situation in which students can be very quick to make allegations against their professors. And it's becoming quite uncomfortable, in all honesty. So that's what I got to say.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And this is an ongoing discussion, and I'm glad you brought up Mark Crispin-Miller's case, along with David Miller, which some of us have also mentioned earlier. And so this, yeah, and it's very important. During the Iraq War in America, there was this pressure that if you went against the government when there was a hot war on, that this was somehow undermining national security or the questioning your patriotism and so forth. And post 9/11, now it's a threat to public health. That certain speech is deemed to be a threat to public health. This is the actual words that are being used by so many institutions. So on this issue, I think this is a really important issue, the throttling of speech, of inquiry in an educational setting, of discourse as it pertains to 9/11 or a number of other issues. I want to go to Professor Jeremy Keenan on this issue to give us some long-range perspective. What have you observed changes over the decades that's got us to this point right now? And I'm sure you've thought about this. We just wanted to know what your feelings are on this issue, looking at your career in academia.
Well, that's what I try and avoid looking at in my career in academia, because in a sense, when the 9/11 situation began, but I should say it probably didn't really impact on me for a year or two, like a lot of us. We watched it and gradually we put things together. But at that time, my academic career, and I've always been in a funny sort of way, sometimes on the edge of it, a little bit moving from one country to another, in spite of having the title of professor at various places and so forth. Because I've always worked in difficult places, let's put it that way. And at the time of 9/11, I was back in the Sahara incredibly happily, because it was the most tranquil place on earth. I could work as a proper anthropologist doing, you know, the sort of things, fiddling around with cultural stuff and, you know, what anthropologists sort of traditionally did. And there were absolutely no problems. And then, and I should say, I was funded all through that period, 100%, all my university salary, everything was funded through top level research grants. You name them, I had them. Then around about 2004, 5, when my tranche and several research grants were running out, I had the arrogance, I suppose, to think, well, I just apply for more and tick the right boxes and I will get them. Because the thing that they measure on, of course, is production. Exactly, you know, journal articles, and I was churning stuff out at the rate of knots. And the research, it was good quality and, you know, ticking all the boxes and so forth. And suddenly I found that no, it just stopped. And after about a year of investigating or two, I found that MI 5 and 6 had got in there on the committees, and the fact that I then found that there was some pretty rotten stuff going on within academia. And from that moment on, I have actually felt fairly shameful of academia and what is not happening in it, what is happening in it, and the things we're talking about now. And when I heard about David Miller last week, I wasn't surprised. I had a post similar to his at the same university. I have a gagging order on me, so I can't say anything, but I dropped him a note and say, this isn't the first time this has happened. So anyone at Bristol listening, I'm not saying anymore because I can't. I've been gagged and I can't afford to pay off that gagging order. You know, if I win the lottery, first thing I'm going to do is publish everything. But, you know, this has been going on for that period of time. I should say my case is very different from his, but it was the same university and similar sort of stuff. So I had to make a decision. Do I just pack up doing research, which is expensive? The Sahara is an expensive place to work. You want to get a vehicle or anything, you know, it costs a fortune because it's getting shot up or blown up by somebody or other. So it costs a lot of money to get from A to B, unless you walk. I made the decision then that the only way, if I wanted to go on doing research, and I thought, I'm old enough, or I'm so old that my responsibilities have gone away. My children have grown up, they're earning living and so forth. And, you know, I'm free from, if you like, the responsibilities that most younger academics are chained by: mortgages, housing, family, kids, all this sort of stuff. I was free of that. And I made the decision that I either had to fund my research myself and fund myself and keep myself alive, you know, stacking shelves at Tesco or whatever one does to make coin, etc., or pack up doing research. And I made that decision, and I have been able to fund myself now for nearly 20 years, 100%, literally by writing on the Sahara, funnily enough. This is why I've written so much. I write stuff anonymously for consultancies and stuff, and it's all going onto a public archive fairly soon, I think. And also packing up, giving up my pension. So I got rid of a pension. So I fund myself off a rather dodgy pension. Now, if you're younger, you cannot do that. You're trapped by family, mortgages, whatever, and these sorts of responsibilities. And this is an appalling thing. Fortunately, I still have a university status, and I'm extremely grateful to Queen Mary University London for giving me that. I'm hugely grateful to them, and colleagues there who I have the highest regard for. So I have my university status, which is important. I have publishing outlets, which are very easy, obviously, to come by. But that situation I find shocking. It's appalling. And of course, I can get away with it because I'm old. I'm decrepit. You know, my concern now is getting 2 new hips so I can get back to do a bit more research. And I've got the funding for the hips. I've just got to get the head tickets sorted out and all the rest of it. That'll happen next year, hopefully. But for younger people, I'm talking about pretty well everyone up to the age of 50, this is impossible. The pressures within academia now to stay within bounds, and David has been talking about it. David, I liked hearing you, by the way, first time we met, or FaceTime, and the rest of you and peers and so forth. This is shocking. I mean, what is happening in academia is an absolute disgrace. And if the world does survive long enough, and I somehow doubt whether it will, the way we're going, maybe we will look back at this period, with absolute shame of what we've allowed to happen, the society has allowed to happen within its universities. And really, that's probably all I can say. This is one other thing, too. We talk about the areas we've been talking about, the Sahara, Syria, Middle East, and these sort of countries. Another thing is, actually, if you are a regular academic, I mean, employed in an institution, it is pretty near impossible to go and do research there. Even if you had funding or anything else, you've got to sign ethical forms, the ethical procedures, which I should endorse. They are very good and they're very strict, but they actually rule all these areas out. If I had research students, I would not be allowed to let them go and wander around in these countries and do research. It would be unethical, full stop. And this is why no one is doing research. I talk about the Sahara. There's nobody doing research there from top to bottom, left, right, anywhere at all, because they are not allowed to go there by their own universities because of ethical reasons, which are quite sound and safe. It is dangerous. It is a high-risk place. At my old age, it doesn't really matter much. Dodder around on semi on a Zimmer frame and all the rest of it, and who cares? But it is dangerous, and universities take that into account, quite rightly so. So in a sense, there's a sort of circularity here, in a sense, or a contradiction in terms, that even if the academe was encouraging us to investigate these things, the own rules of academe, the ethical ones, etc., would in a sense prohibit us doing that. And I think if you look at all of us, in a sense, I'm hoping I'm saying the right thing, we all have slightly peripheral, marginal positions in one way or another. We're slightly out of the mainstream. I look at Piers, who now is running his own chair in Berlin. He had a big chair in Sheffield a few years ago. He's now sitting on his own self-made chair. I sort of do the same thing, and a few others as well. And I think this is what is happening. So much investigative work, we call it academic or good journalism, responsible journalism, is moving out of the mainstream because it has no choice. And I'm rather waffling on here, I think, repeating what everyone else is saying, but those are my views on it. And I just thank God that I am as old as I am, because no one can get at me anymore. I can't be dismissed, I can't be fired, I can't be hung, drawn, and quartered. Well, maybe somebody might try. You can plead senility soon, get away with it. But if you're younger, life is difficult. And I feel hugely sorry for those academics, and particularly the younger ones, postgraduate students who come to me all the time. Can we do this? Could I do research? Could you help me? And I say, forget it. There's no ways, you're going to be allowed in there. Try to get into Algeria. You'll get in. You'll never come out except in the coffin. Try to get into Libya. Forget it. Anywhere. It's a tragic situation, and I've said enough.
No, thank you very much for that comment, Jeremy. And I want to go over to Dr. Lucy Morgan Edwards, and just in light of what we just heard as well, what are your observations on having worked in Afghanistan? Obviously, that's the country that was blamed for 9/11 ostensibly. At least that's the general cause and effect association that the average person, and especially in the United States or Western Europe, would have. But there was a time, Lucy, when you couldn't even say such a thing. Even in the West, that was seen as a little bit too hot, or almost a third rail topic. It's like, what do you mean? We're at war, basically. I just want to get your just general thoughts, having worked in the region and then come back to Europe. That sort of culture shock, or that change, the information gulf that you experienced.
Yes, I mean, I wasn't really even aware of the events of 9/11 until I moved to New York in 2014. And I knew at the time, I watched the events unfold on TV, and I knew something was very wrong with the story. But I was so focused on Afghanistan because I'd been there the year before, that I was in contact with the people I'd been working with the year before. And they all expressed complete ignorance about 9/11 and how it was being linked to them. They were so innocent in a way. These were our male staff in Kabul that I was in touch with, and I have letters from some of them that I'd written that were passed through the UN kind of postage system. I mean, when I then went back to the region after 9/11, I was based in Pakistan, and then I went back to Kabul in January 2002, and I stayed there until the end of 2005. And I did all these different jobs, and I started writing my book, and I was a freelance journalist. And really, I was always a freelancer. I wasn't there with the cover of a job with MI6 or the Foreign Office or a university or anything. I was always a freelancer. I picked up jobs when I was there because I loved the region. The one exception being when I went back to work for the European Union ambassador. But even at that time, my colleagues were actually being paid by the national governments, and I was paid by the EU, and the inference was that you're the only one that's not working for an intelligence agency. And then to progress, when I published my book, I wrote my book actually out of frustration and real anger actually at what I perceived to be what wasn't being reported in the media. And I wanted to get that out. And in fact, at the end of the day, I had to self-publish the book because I had a publisher, IB Taurus, and they wanted the daughter of Sherrod Cooper Coles, who was the British ambassador to Kabul. They wanted her to edit it. And although she was very good in many ways, I just didn't want the conflict of interest as I perceived it, and in particular as his book was coming out. But I did find with the British publishing industry, it was a very clubby kind of atmosphere. People were asking me if I knew Rory Stewart, as though that would confer some kind of an opening of the gates for me, as though I needed his approval to publish my own research. And I had people saying, but you're a woman, you can't write about a military strategy. That's a man's book, and men don't read books written by women, and vice versa. So it was really difficult. And I really felt I had a very strong story, which was this story of the peace plan offered by Commander Abdul Haq to topple the Taliban from within and bring back the former king. So I ended up self-publishing the book, and I was pleased that I did that because I felt that I needed the latitude to do it exactly how I wanted it. I didn't want anyone editing out certain bits. I wanted it to be the story that I wanted. And in fact, there were things that I maybe could have put in that I didn't put in, but most of what I wanted to put in, I put into the book. But I then found the problem was that I couldn't distribute it because I needed to find another publisher who would give it their kind of umbrella to market it and actually crucially distribute it. Even on Amazon, you can't distribute a book. And although that's now moved on because you could then do a soft copy and self-publish a book on Amazon, but now of course with censorship that can just be erased very quickly. So I was quite lucky because I got Pluto Press, which was Palgrave Macmillan in the US. They agreed to take on the book, and they promoted it for 2 years, which meant that I could get it distributed in the US. And I've, ever since, although I've lived in different countries since, I did a lot of lectures about the book even in high-level places like RUSI, Oxford University, Harvard, Kennedy School, and so on, and even at the New America Foundation. But I found that finding a university position is very hard these days because people just don't seem to be interested in my kind of research and they are much more interested. The interests are shaped by the people who are funding the chairs and so on. And as others have said, it's very narrow, and there are certain subjects that are clearly forbidden. And you have to be prepared to play that game. And Exeter, where I did my PhD, they had just set up a Security Strategy Institute, which was a bit of a kind of branch of the King's Security Institute. So these departments are very heavily militarily dominated, and that's where the money is. And so you have a lot of soldiers and maybe people who are involved in intelligence and diplomats and so on, who come to these departments at places like King's College, Exeter Strategy Institute, and the Changing Character of War program at Oxford, and then of course in the US, SACE at Johns Hopkins and so on. But yes, they're very narrowly defined, and although some of them let me come and do talks on my book, I think that getting a position, you have to really toe the line of liberal humanitarian intervention, etc. And anything that deviates from that is not really welcome.
No, you're absolutely correct. I've experienced that as well. within the British academia. There's a lot of political pressure to view the Arab Spring as a certain way, and that's usually aligned with how the BBC is looking at it, or the Guardian, and so forth. Yeah.
I mean, I had this really bad experience with the Changing Character War program, where ironically, that's where I met Piers, and he was about the only person who would talk to me at this meeting that we attended in 2012 about transitions out of conflict zones. And I later discovered that I was supposed to chair a session, and I was basically then told I couldn't chair a session. And I think it was because at a previous meeting that I had attended at Marlborough College, which was organized on the Helmand intervention, there were several military people there, and I challenged them about the British military's capture and kill policy, and the fact that I'd heard from people who'd been working in Helmand that the British were doing a lot more killing than detaining of Afghan, of Taliban and so on. And so I challenged them on that. And when I then went to the Changing Character War program a year later, boy, did I pay the price for that. And I was deplatformed from chairing a session. I was, no one spoke to me. I mean, and then I later heard from a guy who worked for the Cabinet Office that they'd all been warned not to speak to me because I was a loose cannon. And I'm a loose cannon because I ask the difficult questions, and I'm not scared to speak out because I have always been independent. And I've been lucky that I've been able to do that. But there was definitely it's a very constricted space, very constricted.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Lucy. And I want to go to Richard Ellifritz there. And Richard, first of all, I wanted to get your comment on this general discussion, if you have anything to add to what's been said around this issue regarding academic freedom and speech on campus and so forth. But also I wanted to talk, because you've done some very deep research into movements, in particular the 9/11 Truth Movement, which I think is fascinating. And I do have a question about that. But firstly, if you could give us your comment on this issue of the academy.
Sure. I actually just had to step away from the camera and microphone for a second because what Jeremy was saying struck very close to home with me. So I am one of those young, academics who really loves teaching. Like, I love my students, I love teaching, I love being in the classroom. And sadly, because of the government's responses to the pandemic, I haven't seen my students face to face in much longer than I care to admit. So just on top of that, like how I see that working in the context of the last 20 years is that when I finally came around to even being interested in looking through the literature on what people in my field had written about 9/11, it wasn't until probably about 2010. And so then I discovered that if there was any type of critical assessment of 9/11, it was these blowback theories that proposed that the events occurred not because Al-Qaeda hated us for our freedom, but because the foreign intelligence and military interventions in the Middle East had been disrupting, let's say lightly, the lives of people in the Middle Eastern Muslim Arab world, which is this constellation of ideas that had been developing since the 80s in popular culture to sort of provide this overarching enemy, the other, as Edward Said discusses, this Eastern other, this non-Western character who's this kind of angry, bearded, yelling Muslim individual. And there's actually a meme that went around in the 9/11 truth community that I've studied for over a decade about a particular individual that was actually used in popular media to represent the othered, stereotypical angry Muslim male. And so there's a lot of things going on. And today is what I mean. A lot of things going on today. We don't have to necessarily propose some orchestrated, organized conspiracy over the decades. We can say that there's institutional inertia from the organizations and institutions that have interests in expanding military bases, basing rights, the mineral assets, and so on throughout the Middle East, like Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote about in his book, The Grand Chessboard. So these are just sort of common interests that C. Wright Mills, a very famous sociologist, said would produce what's called the power elite. So coinciding interest, let's say in corporate media, in federal government in the United States, and allied governments in the UK, for example, the military would align to the degree that they would have the that they would capitalize on the opportunities. For example, that was called for in the document on rebuilding America's defenses, produced by the Project for the New American Century, in which many signatories of that eventually became the Bush administration. Now, as I spoke on, Lance DeHaven Smith, and I believe Mark Crispin Miller too, if I'm not mistaken, are suspicious of that election, the 2000 election, in which many of those signatories on the Project for a New American Century's document became the Bush administration. So C. Wright Mills in my field would say, well, when there's a coincidence of interest among the economic, political, and military establishments, there will be an alignment of sort of the will to act, the agency of the consortium of individuals who network together to achieve their interests. So over that same period of time, like for example, just as a quick example, in the 95 Oklahoma City bombing, the initial news reports was that, if I could paraphrase, but kind of a close quote was, "This has Middle Eastern terrorism written all over it." I think that was Ted Koppel, who later had to come out and say, well, that's what the DOD was telling us. So that's just an example of our, as Cass Sunstein says, our effective watchdog press telling the public what the DOD told the press to tell the public. And then they later had to say, well, we were wrong, and then blamed it all on a single actor, kind of like these things are typically done. So that's what, so just to put a pin in that point, that's what Lance DeHaven Smith was doing with the SCADS concept, is saying, but are there patterns? Like, as a sociologist, I study patterns. I was trained to study patterns in society. Are there patterns that are going on in these alleged conspiracies? And if so, are there any other connected interests that we could designate as problematic? But I'm kind of interested in this broader thing. What was also going on simultaneously is this popular culture sort of designation as the Middle Eastern Muslim Arab terrorist, right? As this enemy. So when 9/11 happened, the public was ready to accept this idea because the movies, the television shows, and then even after that, there were HBO movies and syndicated broadcast television shows that sort of, worked off of this already generated cultural media, Hollywood broadcast idea that the Middle East is a valid enemy, that these were dehumanized, non-Western, non-American, non-European people who would carry out a surprise attack on an innocent nation. And the best that I could find in my field and in the social sciences was that, well, this was blowback. This is blowback from foreign intervention. And so what I think a group like this does is it tries to set out an emergent norm for other academics and scholars and people who want to publish in what are, the sciences, peer-reviewed, published journal articles. We want to set out an emergent norm to make it acceptable to look back over the past 20 years or 30 or 40 years, or back to the 60s, and try to make it acceptable to take an even more critical analysis that does the one thing that you cannot do unless you're going to want to cross those acceptable boundaries of discourse, which is to impute agency to elites in the organizations and institutions that make the decisions that impact societies around the world for decades and centuries to come. So that's what we're trying to do. But the problem is that there is already a process of social closure. So this is a idea espoused by Max Weber. Social closure has already happened. It's already happened, and it's continuing to happen by the discursive ideological barriers that are set up by the organizations I discussed, Compact and Crest. They continue to operate. So why currently would anybody in the academy want to follow in our footsteps or align with us if it meant that they weren't going to be able to pay their bills or save for their kids' college funds, save for their retirement? They're going to risk their reputation and their status to align with us crazy conspiracy theorists who think that 9/11 was an inside job, let alone in our current climate, that if you don't say, for example, I've noticed this as a pattern, if you don't say these words, the safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines that everybody should get, you will be considered an illegitimate interlocutor. So now we live in a climate where it's not just something that, for example, Kevin Barrett or Anthony, I'm struggling with his last name, out of Canada.
Yes.
Stephen Jones, who lost their jobs, Mark Crispin Miller, currently as the example, crossed those discursive boundaries and had some student go to Twitter, a social media outlet known to privilege some voices as opposed to others. You can go to Joe Rogan's interviews with the head of Twitter to see those interviews where that case is probably basically brought to the public court. So currently we have a situation where, for me, it's inconsequential. I don't talk about COVID or the pandemic in my classes because it's an ongoing thing that scientists need to hash out themselves. I have deeper theoretical issues that we need to deal with the cohesion of society, of some conflicts in society. And there is another issue. Today, I've been seeing a lot of social media showing that there are statues being torn down in the West that were designated to celebrate who was once considered a hero of this day and is now a dastardly villain. And right or wrong, good or bad, it is a fact of the matter that we are living through the times where individuals, probably the age range of 17 to 25, if I had to guess, are willing to tear down the material markers of a past history and to alter what can be known in that material sense. So we're living that to this day. So there's another facet or possibly dimension to the discursive obstructions that are erected for just a group like this who wants to discuss 9/11, the ensuing wars on terror. But there's all these other dynamics that have been set in place that, and this is my last point, I'll stop with this, that each and every possible argument that you can make, whether it stems back to the 50s or 60s, whether it's current, whether it's about culture, institutions, organizations, whether it's about foreign policy or domestic policy, they all have a cognitive and discursive trap already set up for them in the existing literature that I call anti-conspiracy discourse.
Yeah, so it's systemic, to borrow a word from that side. It's systemic.
So I'm sorry, that was your first question. If you need to move on, I understand. I can make
No,
the second one.
we will have to. I mean, I'd love to talk about the 9/11 truth movement in more detail, but we might have to leave that for another conversation. Hopefully, we'll have that conversation because that's an interesting cultural issue as well. And I know you've looked deep into that. But thank you.
I can say
Go ahead.
one thing real quick about that. I was just in Manhattan a month ago for the probably fifth or sixth time interviewing activists with the 9/11 Truth Movement, and my data almost routinely contradict the anti-conspiracy discourse generated by psychologists and journalists. So, just as an example, the anti-conspiracy discourse progenitors say that we need to feel special and secure knowing that somebody's in control of the world generating these conspiracies. This is one of their lines of logic. The people that I've interviewed, when they woke up or they had their conversion experience, they felt helpless, they felt hopeless, they felt depressed, anxiety, stopped eating, stopped sleeping, they lost their marriages, lost their jobs. Why on earth would anybody want to risk any of that or go through any of that just to feel like there's some grand conspiracy afoot? And again, this year, that data bore itself out in the interviews that I conducted. So that's all I'll say.
Okay, well, and again, we can also look to hopefully now and in the future at Richard's research and work on these and other topics as well. And probably in the interest of time, we've gone well over for the event, but we're very happy that we have been able to get everything included in all the discussions, including this roundtable discussion. So I wanted to go back to Piers just for a final comment. And then after that, Piers, I just want to give the room, sorry, actually, before that, Oliver, I forgot to go to you first and then to Piers. But go ahead for your final thoughts on this, Oliver.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. My final thought, I would like to table the question for further discussion later on in other contexts. How are we doing as the brokers of propaganda, as the critiques of the propaganda apparatus? How good a job are we doing? Momentarily, I suppose, after 2003, I thought maybe we're doing quite a good job. I mean, we had totally failed with 9/11, but I thought with 2003, we were doing quite a good job, not least because the propagandists were doing such an awful job. They were doing a pathetically bad job as propagandists. They should all have been fired at that point, and perhaps they were, because a few years later, the whole game seemed to go up a notch. And by the time of Russiagate, I had to say I began to feel this is way more sophisticated than it used to be. And it seemed that finally, the propagandist machinery were picking up on some of the key lessons that we as propagandists had learned and were now racing ahead of us by applying these lessons to their own strategies. So, for example, with Russiagate, what do you find? You find that the propaganda apparatus yields all of the things that you're looking for if you want to be convinced that something is true. You want to know that something is true? You look to see who are the authoritative people who should really know about this stuff, and what are they saying? And they're all saying the same thing. My goodness, that must be true. Who's saying the same thing? Well, Mueller is saying, and the FBI is saying the same thing, and all the government agencies are saying the same thing, and they're saying it very loudly and very convincingly. And behind them all of the intelligence agencies, both particularly British. The British have an enormous weight of implication, of involvement in these propaganda games. In fact, I suspect that the British actually may be leading the US and NATO incubus in the game of propaganda. The United States provides the military stuff, and God knows what the West Europeans think that they're doing. But the British seem to be really smart at this propaganda stuff. So are we doing a good job? And I think, well, probably not. Although Russiagate is on the verge of total dismantlement, we think, because we're in the inside of this, I think for most people out there, Russiagate, it's all about how Trump was a tool of Putin. They still, I think, for the most part, think that. And then I look at Xinjiang, and this is a huge issue for all of us, because you can't go around saying there's another Holocaust out there, or you can't go around saying, well, there's no Holocaust, there's nothing. You can't not worry about charges of genocide. Essentially, this is what it adds up to. Am I suspicious? Absolutely. 99% are very suspicious of most of the sources that we hear about Xinjiang, but that doesn't give you leeway to say for sure, hands on heart, this ain't true. Because that requires an enormous amount of research and also networking and resources which very few of us have access to. So I'll leave it at that. With my worries that although the military surveillance, propaganda apparatus, whatever we want to call it, seemed to be hopelessly out of their depth back in 2003. I think now they're running way ahead of anything that we can do to properly dismantle it.
Yeah, you're referring to with Xinjiang, you're referring to the allegations of Uyghur genocide, and certainly that's being put forward as one of the reasons to reclassify China into the sort of axis of evil column there. But more than likely, a lot of this is formed in the same way as the Caesar files with Syria that led to Caesar legislation, and also the Magnitsky. The story of Sergei Magnitsky, which led to Magnitsky sanctions. So that's a whole area of discussion there, how these narrative has been transformed into foreign policy instruments by the United States and its allies. Certainly an interesting conversation that we can have at a future event, hopefully. But I want to go back to Dr. Piers Robinson for your final thoughts, and then I'll give the room to anybody that would like to give a final comment before we wrap up today. Piers?
Well, I think academia is in a very poor state, and I concur with what Jeremy and what others have been saying. I think it's also very important to remember that, and this is certainly my experience, having sort of gotten myself out of the institution and established myself, that there's a huge, wide audience out there of people who are interested in the kind of work we're doing. And whilst the academy is very inward-looking and self-censoring, and we are sort of trying to chip away at it, at the same time, we look in the other direction. There are a lot of people out there who understand, appreciate what we're doing. And in terms of this question of progress that Oliver was answering, I think I have more people contacting me today. I see more activity in terms of members of the public becoming aware of propaganda, becoming aware of deception and bias than I've ever seen before. So I think there is, in some ways, progress. There is more people realizing or waking up to the kind of problems that we talk about and we discuss. But there is a difference between the academy, which is sinking ever deeper into the mud, I think, and this wider audience, which is starting to wake up. And I do think that, my final point is that I think independent media and the work that Pat and Mike have done with UK Column and 21st Century, as well as the many other independent media, have demonstrated how much progress can be made in terms of educating people, informing people with a broken mainstream media. And maybe we as academics need to try to understand or try to learn from that and think of ways of developing structures which are, in a sense, a kind of independent academia, at least for as long as mainstream academia remains as incapacitated as it appears to be at this point in time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Piers. I think we've
and
got some.
Sorry, just to say thank you to everyone, and thank you especially to you and Mike for hosting us. But thanks to everyone for the presentations, which I'm looking forward to them going up permanently.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, it's very important that we bring this material together with these speakers to present their views and their work, and we're very honored to have all of you join us today. I wanted to give the floor. Is there anybody else that would like to raise your hand if you would like to give any final words. Matt Campbell, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I mean, it's a little bit of a plug. Architects Engineers for 9/11 Truth have made a documentary called The Unspeakable, and it features a total of 4 victim family members and friends, and it's quite powerful because it's certainly not a technical film. It essentially follows the journey of the 4 of us, or 4 families who have been affected right from the day of 9/11 right through to current events, and in particular, it follows the inquest journey that I've been on. It's supposed to be out Tuesday, or certainly later on this week. It'll be available free on YouTube. And in terms of nudging normies, I think someone referred to that earlier. It could be quite effective. Certainly, the feedback that I've received from the people who've watched the preview is it just opens people's eyes to the fight that we have as family members whenever some sort of tragedy occurs, but you don't feel that you've had truth and justice. And obviously it kickstarted everything that we've been talking about this afternoon. And thank you everyone for your continued work. It was really brilliant listening to everyone this afternoon.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, and thank you also, Matt, for showing everybody what can be done with steely will and determination as well. So we all appreciate your efforts, and you have a lot of people behind you, people who you don't even know. They're definitely behind you and your family on this as well. So thank you. And anybody else who would like to give a final word before we wrap up this session? Okay. I think,
Let me jump in
oh, sure. Yep, Richard.
As somebody who's an ordained clergy person. I feel the need to put some optimism in that whatever your faith or belief system, atheism to whatever, there's always opportunity, time, and hope. So I like to draw from popular culture. Whatever movie it was it's always darkest before the dawn. So I think that if anybody makes it this far in watching this, and just to speak to my fellow panelists, just the fact that, for me, that I'm surrounded by dedicated individuals like yourselves, personally, it gives me hope and courage to continue doing what I do. And I hope that people watching this can see in themselves that they can do the same.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Richard Fritz, also Matt Campbell. Thank you very much, Professor, also who couldn't join us because of the time difference across the international date line, Professor Daniel Brody in Japan. Thank you to Professor Oliver Boyd Barrett, Professor Jeremy Keenan, and Dr. Lucy Morgan Edwards, Dr. David Hughes, and of course, Dr. Piers Robinson. And I do encourage people, and we will also put the URL to the working group on propaganda and the 9/11 global war on terror. And that's also an organization that you, if you so wish to, you can support them as well. Thank you to our team here at the UK column, behind the scenes, working very hard. Mike and Steph, thank you very much. And again, thank you all of you for making the time to join us for this, what we believe is a very important discussion. And again, these videos and presentations will be available up online. They'll be at the ukcolumn.org, but also we'll be hosting them on Rumble as well. And I'm sure that they will make their way up to another video sharing platform. It will probably end up on other YouTube channels as well, and also on Odyssey and some of the other video sharing platforms. So again, thank you very much to everybody who has joined us on the live stream for this online symposium, this very unique online symposium. And certainly we will be continuing this discussion and many other discussions here on the UK Column live stream. You can join us as well Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at ukcolumn.org for a weekly news program. And also we encourage you to go and visit 21stcenturywire.com for more news, views, and analysis, and the Sunday Wire radio show on Sunday as well. But many other fantastic alternative media outlets, and also people who haven't appeared with us who have been mentioned by our various presenters. We encourage you also to go and see their work. There'll be links and references from all of the speakers' notes, and they'll be included as well. And we do, again, encourage you to follow up on the research links and to look at what's being done right now and what you can engage with in terms of the conversation academically, but also for journalists out there as well. This is also a very important resource for you as well. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen, for this first edition of Propaganda, 9/11 and the Global War on Terror. And we appreciate your viewership, and we hope that you all have a great week. Take care.